In the winter of 218 BC, the valley of the Po River lay cold and sodden beneath low grey skies. It was here in northern Italy that the two mightiest factions of antiquity, Rome and Carthage, would meet in the first great battle of the Second Punic War. Rome, caught by surprise, scrambled to respond to this Carthaginian threat. Two consular armies had been raised for the year, one under Publius Cornelius Scipio, the other under Tiberius Sempronius Longus. Scipio had attempted to intercept Hannibal in Gaul, only to be outmaneuvered. Their first clash occurred at the Battle of the Ticinus, a cavalry skirmish in which Scipio was severely wounded and narrowly rescued by his son, who later became known as the famed Scipio Africanus. Scipio retreated to a fortified camp near the Trebia River, awaiting the arrival of his colleague Sempronius, whose army marched north from Sicily with urgency. With the Roman forces united, they believed they could finally crush this Carthaginian invader. The Romans formed themselves up into battle in their standard Roman Republic formation, the triplex axis, with approximately 20,000 heavy legionaries making up their center. The newer recruits at the forefront, with the more experienced of the bunch at the center and rear. Roughly 16,000 Roman and Italian allies made up both flanks of the Roman army. Typically lighter troops used as a placeholder, whilst the heavier troops at the center could smash through their opponent. And lastly, some 4,000 Roman cavalry were placed on the wings to combat the Carthaginian cavalry. Hannibal Barca, commander of the Carthaginian forces in Iberia, had crossed the Alps in one of the most audacious military marches in history. He arrived in northern Italy with his army severely battered, having lost many men to brutal cold, starvation, and attacks from hostile tribes, yet still commanding a hardened multinational army of Africans, Iberians, Gauls, cavalry, and elephants. Hannibal's force was of equal size to that of the Romans, 40,000 troops in all. This multinational force consisted of 11,000 African and Libyan infantry positioned on Hannibal's right flank. An additional 10,000 infantry from Iberia positioned on the left flank. Positioned at the center was roughly 8,000 troops from the Gallic tribes. Though evenly matched in numbers, Hannibal's army possessed two critical advantages over the Romans. First, he had a larger force of cavalry. Second, his cavalry were more diverse and versatile. 3,000 Iberian cavalry were stationed on his left, and 4,000 Libyan cavalry were stationed on his right. Hannibal's secret weapon, his Numidian light cavalry, about 4,000 strong, were spread out on both of his wings. Hannibal had also brought along a small number of war elephants, perhaps no more than 50, most having died crossing the Alps. Before the two armies had met on the battlefield, Hannibal had sent Numidian cavalry to harass the Roman camp. On first light on this bitter winter morning, the lightly armed and highly mobile Numidian riders darted forward, throwing javelins into the Roman encampment, then swiftly retreating before the Romans had time to form a counterattack. Sempronius Longus, already inclined toward battle, took the bait. Hannibal had recognized early on the Consul Sempronius's temperament and exploited it. Without allowing his men to eat breakfast or properly prepare, he ordered the entire army to assemble and pursue the enemy. The Roman troops marched out of camp and into the freezing waters of the Trebia, the river swollen to chest height in places. Armor weighed them down. Cold stiffened fingers and limbs. Shields became slippery, muscles cramped. By the time they reached the far bank, Roman soldiers were soaked, shivering, and already semi-fatigued. Across the field, Hannibal's troops waited, fed, warmed by fires, and fully prepared. The hot-headed Sempronius Longus was eager to get the battle underway. He opted to go on the offensive, sending forward the entirety of his skirmishers to initiate the fight. The Roman velites, young but capable, excelled forward, almost sprinting across the snow-ridden battlefield, hoping to warm their freezing bodies. They were met in the middle of the field with fierce resistance by Hannibal's Libyan and African skirmishers. The skirmishers steadied themselves, then began loosing hails of projectiles at each other. The javelins and slings rained down violently, with many hitting their mark. This continued on for a brief period, until after a few minutes of intense fighting, both forces were disengaged, with neither having gained any clear advantage. The Velites, with haste, retreated back behind the lines of advancing Roman legions, with the Roman Hastati leading the front line. Behind were the Principes at the center, and the veteran Triarii making up the third line at the rear. Roman Consul Sempronius Longus commanded his force from a safe distance. Longus was eager to win the battle swiftly and put an end to this foreign invader. In this moment, Roman discipline showed its true worth. Despite exhaustion, hunger, and cold, the legions pressed forward steadily, maintaining exceptional cohesion and good form. The Roman infantry smashed mercilessly into the Carthaginians. The more numerous and heavier legions at the center hit particularly hard against the Gallic tribes at Hannibal's center. There, Hannibal had arguably placed his weakest force, especially in terms of numbers. The Gallic tribesmen, lightly armored, were at a fighting disadvantage when faced against the Roman legion head-on. They began to suffer losses at an alarming rate. Simultaneously, the Roman-Italian allies on the flanks had engaged Hannibal's Iberian and African troops on the flanks, where to no surprise were not as effective as their counterparts and were held to a standstill. The Roman cavalry, however, did not engage with the numerically superior Carthaginian force. It was Hannibal who waited patiently for the right time to strike. Only once all of the Roman infantry got tied down in the melee struggle, then would Hannibal spring his plan. He counterattacked and sent his cavalry to engage with the inferior Roman cavalry. The clash of cavalry was chaotic. Horses sent off balance, riders dislodged from their mounts. The Roman cavalry, although formidable, were struck from all directions. They were pitted against the heavy Iberian and African riders up close, and struck from afar by javelins from the swift Numidian riders. They were simply outclassed and tactically outmaneuvered by Hannibal's brilliance. At the same time, his handful of African war elephant riders were given the signal to advance to support the cavalry assault, but were swiftly intercepted and met with fierce resistance by the Roman Velites, who were well equipped to deal with the threat of the large African beasts. They unleashed hails of javelins into the direction of the elephants, cutting down many, whilst sending the rest into a disorderly panic in multiple directions. Although losing the cavalry engagement on the wings, the Romans were winning the fight at the center, or so they believed. The heavy Roman legions pressed onwards, gaining ground against the Carthaginian center. The Gallic tribes stationed there were outnumbered by 2 to 1, and were forced backwards, thus losing vital ground. Whether or not this was entirely intentional in Hannibal's plan is not fully specified. Perhaps the maneuver here was supposed to replicate that of his masterclass at Cannae 2 years later, in which his Gallic troops at the center purposely give ground, leading the Roman troops straight into a trap. In this scenario, however, the Gallic troops were losing ground at a much faster pace, as well as losing troops. Therefore, it leads one to theorize that this specific portion of Hannibal's grand tactic was failing in some regard. The immense weight of the Roman center continued to press onwards, cutting down Gallic troops by the dozen. Although catastrophic for the Carthaginians, Hannibal unveiled his ace card. Whether by sheer luck or by Hannibal being a master at timing, he gave the signal just at the right time for his hidden reinforcements, led by his brother Mago Barca, to emerge. Prior to the battle being initiated, Hannibal had stationed 2,000 Numidian cavalry and African infantry in a nearby forested terrain that overlooked the battlefield. The terrain was perfect in the sense that it was not too close to the battlefield to arouse Roman suspicion, but also not too far away that the reinforcements would arrive too late to aid Hannibal. This explains why Hannibal was eager to draw the Romans into battle, so he could fight them on his own terms. Perhaps in partial he wanted the Roman center to completely run through his Gallic center, thus drawing the Roman legions into what they believed was a winning fight. But by this stage, the majority of the Gallic tribes had been killed or routed. Thus, arguably, Hannibal had underestimated their strength, and this part of his plan did not work exactly as intended. Regardless, by this stage, the battle was in the palm of Hannibal's hands. The entire Roman cavalry had broken and fled in panic, with the sight of his entire cavalry force retreating, and now witnessing the large surge of Carthaginian troops emerging from the south. Roman Consul Sempronius Longus retreated from the battlefield in disgrace. Mago's hidden force burst from concealment behind the Roman army. Striking the rear with no mercy, they plunged deep into the Roman ranks. Panic among the allied infantry ensued. The Romans, already exhausted from the river crossing and cold, found themselves surrounded on three sides. Carthaginian cavalry pressed inward. Light troops rained missiles. The Roman line buckled. Only the strongest part of the Roman army, the central legions, managed to fight their way out and escape. Roughly 10,000 men cut through the remaining Gallic center and escaped toward the Roman town of Placentia. The rest of the army was destroyed or scattered across the frozen fields and riverbanks. The defeat was devastating. Roman losses were immense, thousands killed, many more captured or drowned while attempting to flee back across the Trebia. Hannibal's casualties were comparatively light in comparison, mostly just his Gallic allies. The victory secured Hannibal's position in northern Italy and encouraged more Gallic tribes to join him in large numbers. More importantly, it demonstrated to Rome that this war would not be won by numbers alone. Scipio's warnings had been ignored. Sempronius's impatience had played directly into Hannibal's hands. The Battle of the Trebia was the first great land defeat Rome suffered in the Second Punic War, and a grim omen of what was yet to come at Lake Trasimene and Cannae. Rome had met Hannibal in open battle, and Hannibal had shown them how little they understood the war they had entered.